If you're going through difficult times and feel that life's storms are consuming you, perhaps you're looking for a safe place where you can find peace and security. And that's exactly what Psalm 91 offers us, a refuge in God, a promise of protection and strength, especially in times of adversity. In this video, we'll explore how Psalm 91 can be a powerful prayer to strengthen your faith and bring comfort to your heart, especially when you need it most. Have you ever felt fear or insecurity in the face of life's challenges? What would you do if you knew there was a safe refuge for you? That refuge is God, and He reveals Himself in a special way in this psalm. Let's begin to understand this powerful verse that promises a place of protection. Psalm 91 begins with a strong and welcoming phrase. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. Notice that from the beginning, it invites us to seek shelter and rest in God's presence. This makes us reflect. How many times do we feel overwhelmed by difficulties and don't seek this shelter? Prayer and meditation on this psalm can help us remember that no matter how intense our problems are, God is always ready to welcome us. When reading this psalm, do you feel more secure? Now imagine that you're in a peaceful place, protected, surrounded by God's love. How could this change your perspective on what you're facing today? The truth is that when we trust in God and seek His presence, we find rest for our soul, comfort for our heart, and renewed strength to continue. God promises protection against the dangers that surround us. As verse 3 says, "Surely He will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence." These words speak directly to situations that seem uncontrollable, like illnesses, financial difficulties, or even emotional crises. The psalm assures us that when we seek God, He protects us from these threats. Do you believe that God can deliver you from the situations that distress you? This psalm is a powerful reminder that we are not alone. No matter what happens around us, we can rest peacefully, knowing that God is with us, protecting us. And what's even more incredible, He promises us divine coverage. It's not a temporary or ineffective refuge, but an eternal and secure shelter. Have you ever felt supported by divine protection? What was that experience like? At this moment, reflect on the meaning of God's shelter in your life. What do you feel knowing there is a safe place in the Lord where you can rest? It's an invitation to rest in Him, to trust and not fear, for He is in control of everything. Let's move forward and continue to discover more about the promises contained in Psalm 91. As we delve into each verse, we can see how God presents Himself wonderfully as our refuge and protector. Now, let's reflect on verse 4, which says, "He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge." What a powerful image, isn't it? That of a bird protecting its chicks under its wings. This verse reveals that when we seek God's protection, He surrounds us with His care, making us completely safe under His shadow. This metaphor of being covered by God's wings speaks directly of His love and His zeal for us. Have you ever felt vulnerable, exposed to situations you couldn't control? This verse offers you an image of unconditional love, of a God who not only watches us from afar, but welcomes us, protects us, and gives us security. That brings relief, doesn't it? Knowing that God cares for us with such love and attention. He is not distant or indifferent to our struggles, but is right by our side, ready to protect us. As you meditate on this verse, ask yourself, what has been causing me anxiety or fear lately? How can I take refuge under God's wings and find rest? He offers a type of protection that not only keeps dangers away, but also brings a feeling of tranquility that can only be found in the Lord. No matter what you're facing, God already has the solution, and He wants to surround you with His love and protection. Psalm 91 also reminds us that trust in God is essential. In verse 5, we find the promise that you will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day. This passage is powerful because it speaks of how God strengthens us, not to fear the threats that surround us, whether visible or invisible. Have you ever felt fearful when thinking about the uncertainties of the future? Or perhaps you've encountered a problem so big it seemed impossible to solve. God teaches us here not to fear, because He is with us. This doesn't mean problems will disappear, but that in the midst of them, we have a greater God who sustains us. Imagine for a moment that you have an invisible protector who guards you from all evil day and night. That's the kind of protection God offers. We don't need to walk in fear, but with confidence, for He is our defender. He strengthens us to face difficulties with courage, knowing that His presence accompanies us in every step. As we follow the journey of faith, we can remember that even in the darkest moments, God is with us, illuminating our path. And this is not just a promise from Psalm 91, but a truth we can experience every day. How would your life be if you lived every day with this confidence that God guards you? If you looked at every situation with the certainty that He is by your side, ready to support you. Now think about what you need to surrender into God's hands. He is already ready to help you. All that's needed is trust. Sometimes the biggest challenge is simply surrendering everything to Him and trusting that His protection is sufficient. God not only promises refuge, but also gives us confidence to move forward without fear. Are you ready to fully trust in God's care? If you are, continue meditating on Psalm 91, for it has much to offer about how God is a secure refuge and protector. If you're ready to continue with this prayer and strengthen your faith even more, just say yes. And let's continue with the next part of this journey of trust in the Lord. Now that we understand the importance of finding refuge in God, let's continue our journey through Psalm 91 and see how it assures us that in God, we find protection not only against visible dangers, but also against spiritual threats that we often cannot see. Verse 6 says, "Nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday." Here, the psalm warns us about the invisible dangers that surround us, but also offers us the certainty that none of this can reach us if we are protected by God. This idea of pestilence and plagues might seem distant to some, but it symbolizes much more than physical diseases. It speaks of spiritual attacks, negative forces that try to pull us away from God and discourage us, situations that seem to come from nowhere to knock us down. Who among us hasn't gone through a phase where it seemed problems were piling up one after another endlessly? The feeling that, at some point, evil is coming from all directions. Here, the psalm assures us that these threats have no power over us when we are sheltered under God's protection. He is our shield, our fortress. When we take refuge in Him, we can be sure that no matter how difficulties may come, they will have no power over us. God can deliver us from any evil, whether visible or invisible. And more importantly, He gives us the strength to resist, to not succumb to the pressure imposed on us. Think for a moment. Have you ever felt assaulted by fears or doubts, as if something invisible was trying to knock you down? How have you been reacting to these feelings? God invites you to rest in Him, to trust in His strength, and to be certain that He is greater than any adversity. He will not allow you to be destroyed by the forces around you, for He is stronger than any battle you face. Now we move to verse 7, where we find an even more powerful promise. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. Here, the psalmist speaks of the total protection that God offers. Imagine yourself in the middle of a battle, surrounded by enemies, and yet nothing can touch you. This reminds us that when we are under divine protection, circumstances may be difficult, but victory is already guaranteed. This is a promise of invulnerability amid attacks. No matter how difficult life is or how great the challenges are, God's protection makes us invincible, for He is our defender. And it's not about passive protection, but active. God is constantly watching, defending, and caring for us. Have you experienced feeling this protection in your life? At what moments have you seen God interceding for you when it seemed all was lost? Verse 8 continues reminding us that when we trust in the Lord, we can see the difference between those who are under God's protection and those who are not. What does it mean to you to live under God's protection? How does this change the way you face daily adversities and challenges? As you reflect on this, know that no matter what happens, you are not alone. God walks beside you, and when you take refuge in Him, you find strength, courage, and protection against all evils. This confidence is what allows us to face any situation with peace in our hearts. Now, think about how comforting it can be to know that when seeking shelter in God, He will protect you from all evil, whether visible or invisible. Are you ready to rest completely in His care? If you are feeling God's presence and peace while meditating on Psalm 91, type yes, and let's continue to explore even more of these promises of protection and faith. Now, let's advance further into Psalm 91 and discover how it brings us more promises of protection and security that strengthen our faith. Verse 9 tells us, "Because you have made the Lord your dwelling place, the Most High, who is my refuge." This verse reminds us of something very important, our choice of where to place our trust. It invites us to make God our refuge, our safe place, the place where we seek rest and security at all times. When we read this part of the psalm, we are challenged to think, where have we been seeking protection in our lives? Are we really trusting God as our refuge, or are we trying to fight alone against difficulties? God doesn't call us to face life's battles without His help. He invites us to rest in Him, to make Him our home, the place where we feel truly secure. The key here is understanding that when we make God our refuge, He guarantees us protection, direction, and rest. No matter how strong the winds of adversity are, when we are in God, nothing can successfully reach us. He is our unshakable fortress. If you have been seeking other sources of security, it's time to return to the Lord. He is the only protection that doesn't fail, that doesn't disappoint us. Have you ever had the experience of seeking refuge in something that didn't bring peace? Perhaps you've sought comfort in other people, in material goods, or even in distractions. But only in God can we find true security. When you choose to dwell in the Most High, you are choosing to live under His constant protection. This is more than a promise. It's a guarantee that He will be with you no matter what happens. Then, verse 10 assures us once again, "No evil shall be allowed to befall you, no plague come near your tent." What powerful words, aren't they? This promise that no evil will befall us is an invitation to full trust in God. He not only protects us, but also guards us from all types of evils. This includes physical, emotional, and spiritual difficulties. God is by our side, interceding for us and keeping evil away. Have you ever felt protected from something you didn't know was happening? Divine protection often occurs in ways we don't fully understand, but that we can trust. Many times, God guards us from invisible dangers, from situations that could harm us, but that we don't see because He protects us invisibly. This reminds us of the importance of trusting, even in things we cannot control. God also promises us that His blessings of protection are constant. It's not about momentary care, but daily, continuous care. Life is not free from difficulties, but under God's protection we can walk with the certainty that He is by our side, delivering us from evil, giving us strength to continue. This brings peace to our hearts, for we know we have a defender who is greater than any adversary. Now think a little. What evil have you been facing that you wish to surrender into God's hands? How can you take refuge in Him even more, fully trusting in His protection? God is ready to care for you, to guard your heart and your life. How would your life be if you lived completely secure under God's wings, without fearing evil? Are you ready to rest in this protection He promises? If you are ready to surrender to this divine protection and fully trust in God's care, type yes, and let's move on to the next step of this journey of faith and trust. Now that we've explored the wonderful promises of Psalm 91, let's conclude our journey with the last part of this powerful chapter, which brings an incredible guarantee for those who seek refuge in God. Verse 11 says, "For He will command His angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways." This is a tremendous promise. God, in His infinite goodness, sends us angels to protect us, to guard us, and help us walk in His ways. It seems almost unbelievable, doesn't it? The idea that God sends His angels to take care of us, to deliver us from dangers and guide our decisions. But that's what He promises. When we take refuge in God, He cares for us in a way that goes beyond human understanding. He sends His angels to ensure we won't be hit by the evils that surround us. This shows us that God is truly faithful in His care for us and that He never abandons us at any moment. Now stop and think. Have you ever felt that God intervened in a supernatural way in your life? Perhaps there was an unexpected deliverance, a situation that seemed impossible to overcome, but suddenly you felt that something greater was acting in your favor. This is God's care, and often He uses His angels to protect His children from situations we don't even notice. Isn't it incredible to know that we have a celestial army by our side, ready to protect us at all times? Continuing in Psalm 91 verse 12 reminds us that these angels will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. We are not only protected, but sustained. When difficulties try to knock us down, God sustains us. He gives us the strength to continue the journey. Even when we are at the edge of a precipice, He holds us with His firm and loving hand, preventing us from falling. Have you ever gone through a moment when you felt on the verge of giving up, but something inside you said to continue? Maybe it was God's touch, sustaining you and giving you strength to go on. Even when problems seem too big, God is there holding you with His grace. He promises that He won't let your feet stumble because He is sustaining you with hands of love. In verse 13, the psalm continues saying, "You will tread on the lion and the cobra, you will trample the great lion and the serpent." Here, the psalm speaks to us of victory over the greatest enemies. The lion and the cobra are symbols of destructive forces, of something that seems impossible to overcome. But God promises us that with His help, we will have victory over these forces. No matter how great the difficulties are, God's protection gives us the ability to overcome them. Imagine walking through life with the certainty that nothing can stop you. Difficulties may arise, but you have the confidence that God is with you, giving you victory over everything that tries to knock you down. How would this change your way of facing challenges? How would your life be if you knew that, in Christ, you already have guaranteed victory? Finally, verse 14 concludes with one of the most comforting promises of all. "Because He loves me, says the Lord, I will rescue Him, I will protect Him, for He acknowledges my name." Here, God speaks directly to us. The reason He protects us, guards us, and gives us strength is our love for Him. When we cling to God, He delivers us and puts us in a safe place. It's not a promise for those who merely know God, but for those who love Him, for those who have an intimate relationship with Him. This promise invites us to reflect. Are we really clinging to God with love? Is our trust in Him based on a true relationship, or are we just asking for His help when difficulties arise? Psalm 91 teaches us that the key to living under God's protection is to love Him and trust Him with all our hearts. When we do this, He delivers us, puts us in safety, and gives us victory. Now, think for a moment, how can you cling more to God with love? How can you strengthen your relationship with Him and trust more fully in His protection? The Lord is ready to deliver you, to put you in a safe place, and to give you victory over everything you face. If you feel ready to give your full trust to God, to live secure under His wings and experience His supernatural protection, leave a yes in the comments and share this moment of reflection and faith. May Psalm 91 be a daily prayer in your life.